It's great to meet you and hear the story in this video. At my sister's wedding they laughed at me, until the groom's father recognized my face. My stepsister said it into a microphone the way some women comment on bad weather. Light, amused, as if it were nothing worth pausing over. "This is my stepsister Lauren," Vanessa said, smiling at a room full of people in silk dresses and black tuxedos. Then she tilted her head just a little and added, "She's just a nurse." A few people laughed because she laughed. My father laughed because he agreed. And my stepmother gave the kind of small, satisfied smile that says a plan is unfolding exactly the way she hoped it would. There were more than 100 guests in that ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, champagne glasses catching the light, a jazz trio waiting near the dance floor. Everything arranged so carefully it felt less like a wedding and more like a display window for a life Vanessa had been building for years. I stood at table 16 in a navy dress I'd bought on clearance 3 days earlier, with a paper-thin place card in front of me and my hands folded so tightly under the tablecloth that my fingertips hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't get up. I didn't defend myself. That had been my role in this family for so long that silence came easier than breath. But at the head table, one man did not laugh. The groom's father. Charles Calloway had been lifting his champagne glass when Vanessa said it, and I saw him stop halfway. His hand stayed in the air for a second longer than it should have, and his eyes moved past her, past the flowers, past the string lights reflected in the windows, and landed on me. He stared at me like he was looking through fog at something he'd once known by heart. And in that moment, before I understood why, I felt something shift. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe if stories like this speak to you. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always like knowing how far these stories travel. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 31 years old. I'm a trauma nurse in the emergency department at St. Catherine Regional in Connecticut. And this is the story of how my sister's cruelest moment at her wedding became the beginning of the end of every lie she had built. 3 weeks earlier, the invitation arrived on a Thursday. It was tucked between an electric bill and a grocery flyer in the narrow metal mailbox outside my apartment building. Thick cream paper, gold lettering, a wax seal with Vanessa and Ethan's initials pressed into it, as if the envelope contained a royal decree. I was still wearing hospital scrubs under my coat. I had just finished a 12-hour overnight shift that had stretched to 14. My shoes smelled faintly of antiseptic, and my shoulders were carrying that deep, dull ache that only comes from standing in fluorescent light, while other people's emergencies become your whole world. I unlocked the door to my apartment, dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, and opened the envelope with my thumbnail. They had misspelled my name. Not Lauren. Laura. That might sound small to someone else. Typo. Nothing worth noticing. But when someone has been getting your name wrong for years in ways that are never quite accidental, a mistake stops feeling like a mistake. There was no +1. No handwritten note. No warm line at the bottom that said "Can't wait to celebrate with you." Just the date, the venue, the dress code, and a thin insert card directing guests to the wedding website, where every event had a title that sounded expensive. Welcome brunch, rehearsal dinner, formal garden ceremony, candlelit reception. I set the invitation on the counter beside a stack of nursing journals and stared at it for so long the room went quiet around me. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Vanessa didn't want me there because she loved me. She wanted me there because certain families like to count people the way event planners count chairs. Every branch accounted for. Every awkward detail controlled. Every imperfection placed where it can do the least damage. That night my father called. My father rarely called unless Vanessa needed something. He always sounded almost cheerful in those moments, like he'd stepped into a role he had rehearsed long ago. "Hey kiddo," he said. He hadn't called me kiddo since I was maybe 10. I leaned against the counter and looked at the invitation again. "Hi Dad. You got Vanessa's invite?" I let the silence sit there long enough for him to hear it. "Yes." "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "she really wants you there." That was how I knew it mattered to her image, not to her heart. Because when my father said someone really wants you there, what he usually meant was please don't make this hard for us. "Does she?" I asked. "She does." He said it too quickly. I slid my thumb across the raised gold monogram on the card. She spelled my name wrong. He gave a small laugh, the uncomfortable kind. Oh, Lauren, come on. Don't make a thing out of every little detail. Every little detail. That was my whole life in one sentence. Not being included in family photos was a little detail. Being introduced as Daniel's daughter from before was a little detail. Having my college graduation treated like an inconvenience because Monica had a headache was a little detail. Hearing Vanessa explain to people that I was complicated, sensitive, difficult, intense, that was probably a little detail too. Will you be there? I asked him. Of course, he said. It's my daughter's wedding. There was no cruelty in the sentence. That's what made it worse. No correction. No pause. Just certainty. As if there had only ever been one daughter who counted in that category. After we hung up, I made coffee even though I should have gone to sleep. I sat cross-legged on my couch with my laptop open and looked up the Callaways. I told myself it was curiosity. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also self-defense. Ethan Callaway was exactly what Vanessa had spent the last 2 years advertising on social media without ever saying it plainly. Polished, educated, handsome in an expensive low-drama way, and born into a family that had never once worried about money in public. His father, Charles Callaway, was the founder of a commercial development firm that seemed to own half the shoreline towns near us. His mother, Elise, served on charity boards and hosted fundraisers with floral budgets larger than my monthly rent. Their photographs online looked effortless in the way wealth often does. Good lighting, relaxed shoulders, linen in summer, cashmere in winter, the kind of smiles people wear when life has never required them to explain themselves. Vanessa fit into those pictures almost too well. She had learned that skill young. My mother died when I was 7. Breast cancer. Quick at the end, slow before that. I still remember the scent of her hand lotion and the way she wore pearl stud earrings every single day. Even in pajamas, as if being put together was one small line of defense against a world that could take things from you without asking. 2 years later, my father married Monica. Monica came with polished hair, soft voice, and a daughter named Vanessa who was 11 and already understood something I didn't. People believe confidence faster than truth. From the first month, our house rearranged itself around her. Vanessa got the larger bedroom because she had more furniture. Vanessa's school portraits went up in matching frames on the staircase. Vanessa was signed up for piano and horseback riding and debate camp. I got moved into my father's old study with a daybed pushed against one wall, and a lamp that flickered when the heat kicked on. When people came over, Monica introduced Vanessa as our girl. I was usually Lauren, Daniel's daughter. It's a strange thing to grow up in your own home like a temporary guest. You learn not to leave too much of yourself lying around. You learn to take up less space. You learn how to read tone before words arrive. Most of all, you learn that love in some families is not withdrawn all at once. It is edited down little by little, until one day there is almost nothing left and everyone acts like they have no idea when it happened. At St. Catherine Regional, no one treated me like that. At the hospital, names mattered. Details mattered. The difference between almost and in time mattered. I liked the honesty of that. A patient comes in crashing, and nobody cares whether you wore the right dress to Thanksgiving 10 years ago. Nobody cares that your stepsister knows which fork goes with the salad course. They care whether your assessment is sharp, whether your hands are steady, whether you can catch the small sign that something is about to turn catastrophic before the monitor does. I had built my whole adult life in that clarity. By 31, I was one of the nurse's attendings trusted on difficult nights. I could handle blood, panic, grief, family questions, and the particular kind of silence that falls right before a trauma bay fills. The one thing I could never quite handle with the same competence was my own family, because competence requires rules. And there were no rules in that house except this one. Vanessa mattered more. A week before the wedding, there was a pre-wedding brunch at the Callaway estate. I nearly didn't go. I changed outfits twice. Not because I cared what Vanessa thought, but because I knew exactly what kind of room I was walking into. Wealth has its own dress code even when it says casual. It lives in cut and fabric in the absence of strain. I settled on a pale blue blouse, cream slacks, low heels, and my mother's pearl earrings. I don't wear them often. The backs are old, and one of the posts bends a little if I'm not careful. But that morning I wanted something of hers with me. Something steady. Something mine. The Callaway estate sat behind stone gates and a line of manicured hedges that looked too precise to be natural. I parked my aging Honda between an SUV with custom rims and a glossy black sedan that probably cost more than the townhouse I rented. I stayed in the car for a full minute before getting out. The air smelled like cut grass and early summer roses. Inside, the house was cool and quiet in the way large houses often are, as if money absorbs noise. A catering team moved through the rooms with silver trays. Someone had opened the doors to the back terrace, and white curtains shifted softly in the breeze. Vanessa was in the center of it all, one hand on Ethan's arm, laughing with her head tipped back in a way I knew was calculated to look effortless. She spotted me, and for a flicker of a second, something unreadable crossed her face. Not surprise. Inventory. As if she were assessing whether I looked acceptable enough to leave visible. "Lauren," she said when I reached them. "You made it." The words were friendly. The tone was not. Ethan smiled politely. He had always been courteous to me in the careful way people are when they've been given a vague warning about someone and don't know whether to trust it. "You look nice," Vanessa said. Meaning, not embarrassing. "Thanks," I said. Monica appeared beside her in a green wrap dress and kissed the air next to my cheek. Her perfume was expensive and powdery and immediately familiar in the worst possible way. "We're so glad you're here, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, had never once meant affection from her. It meant behave. I asked where the restroom was, and one of the catering staff pointed me down a hallway lined with family photographs. Not our family, of course. They're the Callaways on ski trips, the graduations, at charity galas, on a sailboat, in front of an ivy-covered college building. The visual record of a family that had always known where to stand together. The restroom door was halfway down the hall, but just beyond it was a room with its door open. A study. I should have kept walking. I know that now. But something in the room caught my eye. Not the bookshelves, not the dark wood desk, not the framed business awards. A photograph. It sat apart from everything else, on a side table under a reading lamp. A man in a hospital bed, bruising along one side of his face. Oxygen tubing. A chest blanket pulled high. Beside the frame was a small card with handwriting on it. "To the Angel on I-95. Under it was a clipped newspaper article in a frame. "Local developer survives highway crash thanks to off-duty medical worker." I stepped closer. The photo quality wasn't great, and the man in the bed was swollen enough that I couldn't immediately place him. In my job, faces blur over time. Not because they don't matter, but because there are so many nights. So many fluorescent ceilings. So many people you hope live. "You found my miracle corner." The voice came from behind me. I turned too quickly. Charles Callaway stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame as if he had just paused there on his way past. Up close, he looked older than he did in photographs, but stronger too. Not softer with age, more precise. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was looking for the restroom." He glanced at the article, then back at me. "Most people stop in here anyway." His tone was easy, but his eyes were measuring something. I looked again at the card. "Were you in that accident?" "I was." His hand moved lightly over the back of the desk chair. 3 years ago. November. Rainstorm on I-95. A truck lost control. "I'm sorry," I said. He smiled faintly. I'm alive." Something in me tightened, though I couldn't have said why. He studied my face for half a second too long. Not rude. Just intent. "Have we met before?" he asked. I gave a small, uncertain laugh. "I don't think so." He kept looking at me. Then a woman's voice called his name from farther down the hall, and the moment broke. Charles blinked as if surfacing. "Well," he said softly, "welcome. I'm glad you came." I thanked him and stepped out into the hallway. Before I had taken 2 steps, Vanessa was there. Her smile was still on her face, but the warmth had drained out of it completely. "Don't wander," she said under her breath. "I was looking for the restroom. You were in Charles's study." Her eyes flicked once toward the open door, then back to me. "Try not to make people uncomfortable." The sentence landed so neatly it almost sounded rehearsed. I looked at her for a moment. "By existing?" She gave the smallest shrug. "By oversharing." Then she turned and floated back toward the terrace, blonde hair pinned just right. Engagement ring flashing in the light. Every movement polished enough to pass for grace if you didn't know what sat underneath it. I stood there alone in the hallway, one hand at my side, one touching the pearl in my left ear. And for the first time that week, I had the strange specific feeling that something in that house already knew me. I just didn't know yet whether it would save me or ruin everything Vanessa had spent years trying to build. I left the Calloway estate an hour later with the same strange feeling still sitting in my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. But only from one side. Like I had walked past a locked door and heard someone move behind it. I drove home with the windows cracked, the late afternoon air warm against my face, and Vanessa's voice still in my ears. Try not to make people uncomfortable. That was always how she did it. She never said, don't embarrass me. Don't exist. Don't ruin the picture. She used softer words. Cleaner words. Words that made me sound like the problem before I had even opened my mouth. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone had 3 notifications. One from the hospital asking if I could pick up part of a Saturday shift. One from an online pharmacy reminding me to refill allergy medication I never remembered to take. And one from Vanessa. It was a group text with Monica and my father included. Please remember the brunch was just immediate family plus Callaways. Rehearsal dinner is more formal. Keep things polished. That was it. No heart emoji. No smile. No sisterly warmth. Keep things polished. I stared at the screen and almost laughed. Because what exactly did she think I was going to do? Show up in trauma scrubs and start describing chest tubes over the crab cakes? But then I read it again. And I understood. She wasn't warning me about behavior. She was warning me about visibility. I didn't answer. An hour later, Monica texted separately. Sweetheart, Vanessa is under a lot of stress. Let's all make this easy for her. There it was again. Sweetheart. A word dipped in sugar and used like a leash. I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and went to shower off the day. At the hospital, stress was honest. It looked like a trauma pager going off at 2:13 a.m. It looked like a mother gripping the side rail of a bed, while you explained why another scan was needed. It looked like blood on tile and charting at midnight and a patient squeezing your wrist because your voice was the only steady thing in the room. At home, stress was theater. It meant Vanessa wanted the world arranged around her mood and called it necessity. The next 4 days passed the way hospital time always does, fast and slow at once. A teenager with a ruptured spleen after a dirt bike accident. A retired teacher in atrial fibrillation who kept apologizing for being a bother. A construction worker with a crushed hand who asked me, while I was starting his whether I had kids. No, I said. He nodded like that answered some private question he had about me. I've noticed that people do that a lot with women in their 30s. They look at your face, your left hand, your voice, and start filling in the blanks. At work, I let them. At home, the blanks had been filled in for years. By Thursday, the rehearsal dinner seating chart had gone live on the wedding website. I found my name under table 14. I was seated with a college babysitter from Ethan's side, a woman listed only as family friend, one of Monica's former catering clients, and 2 people who had already RSVP'd no. Table 14 was nearest the service entrance. I looked at the digital floor plan for a full 10 seconds. Then I shut my laptop. I didn't need to be told what it meant. I spoke fluent omission. That night I called my father. He answered on the 4th ring. Hey kiddo. Again with that word. I stood by my apartment window, looking out at the parking lot, and the grocery store sign blinking red across the street. Why am I at table 14? A pause. Then the exhale of a man already tired of a conversation he had not yet had. It's just seating. No, I said. It's planned seating. Those are different things. Lauren. Why am I near the kitchen? Another pause. I pictured him standing in Monica's carefully redone kitchen, hand over one ear, already glancing toward the doorway in case Vanessa walked in. It's a big event, he said finally. Not everything is personal. That sentence sat between us for a beat. Then I asked the real question. Did Vanessa tell the Callaways there's something wrong with me? Silence. I heard it before he spoke. That hollow little stretch where truth enters the room, and no one wants to be the first to touch it. Lauren, don't start. My grip tightened on the phone. That's not an answer. She may have said you're private, he muttered. Sensitive. I don't know exactly how she phrased it. I felt my face go still. Private. Sensitive. Interesting how quickly those words become unstable, difficult. Not fit for company when a family needs a clean story to tell strangers. So she did, I said. She was trying to simplify things. Simplify things. I looked down at my bare apartment floor, at my shoes kicked off by the couch, at the chipped mug on the coffee table from a hospital fundraiser 3 years ago. My whole life, when something cruel happened in that family, someone found a prettier word for it. Erase me but call it simplify. Exclude me but call it logistics. Humiliate me but call it stress. Did you correct her? I asked. He didn't answer. I could hear the television in the background. Some game show. Someone applauding for money. Dad. She's getting married, he snapped, sudden and sharp. Can you just let one thing be about Vanessa? The line went quiet after that. Not because he regretted it. Because he thought it settled something. I closed my eyes and felt something old in me shift a little farther out of place. When I was 12, I won second place in a statewide science competition. I came home carrying a ribbon and a certificate, and Vanessa was in the living room crying because Monica said no to an expensive dress for a school dance. By dinner, everyone was focused on cheering her up. My certificate stayed in my backpack for 3 days. When I was 19, I got into nursing school. Vanessa had just broken up with a boyfriend she'd had for 6 weeks, and Monica said the timing was unfortunate because the house didn't feel celebratory. When I was 27, I received an Internal Hospital Excellence Award. I almost told them over Thanksgiving dessert. Then Vanessa announced she and Ethan were looking at engagement rings, and my father actually clapped. It was never one thing. It was the pattern, the drip, the weight, the slow instruction that my life should always lower itself so Vanessa's could look taller. By Friday afternoon, I had almost decided not to go to the rehearsal dinner. Almost. I stood in my bedroom with 2 dresses hanging from the closet door. A black one that made me look severe. A navy one that disappeared enough to be safe. I chose the navy. Of course I did. I put on my mother's pearl earrings again. Not for elegance. For ballast. The sky was turning the soft gray blue it gets before evening rain when I pulled into Oakmont Country Club. Valets in white jackets moved between cars. A row of lanterns lit the stone walkway. Through the front windows, I could already see chandeliers and candlelight and women in dresses that looked like they had never once been worn near real life. I stayed in the car for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. I could still leave. No one inside would come looking for me. That thought hurt. Then steadied me. Because once you know exactly how little you are expected, you stop confusing that expectation with love. I got out, smoothed my dress and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the air smelled like garden roses, polished wood and money. And before the night was over, my sister was going to make sure every person in that room knew exactly where she thought I belonged. I found my name on the seating chart before I even stepped fully into the ballroom. Lauren Hayes. Table 14. Not misspelled this time. I almost laughed at that. Apparently, when humiliation was going to be public, accuracy mattered. The seating chart stood on a gold easel near the entrance, framed in white roses and candles. Guests drifted past it with champagne in hand, women in satin and men in dark tailored suits, everyone smelling expensive and relaxed. Table 14 was exactly where I knew it would be before I even looked at the room. Near the service doors. Close enough to the kitchen that I could hear plates being stacked. Far enough from the head table that no one important would have to notice me unless they wanted to. I walked to my seat with that strange calm you get right before bad news is confirmed. The place card was tucked beside a bread plate I probably wasn't supposed to touch before everyone sat down. To my left was a college sophomore named Avery, who introduced herself as Ethan's cousin's babysitter. To my right sat one of Monica's old catering clients, a woman in a silver wrap dress who squinted at me for a second like she knew my face from somewhere and couldn't decide whether it mattered. The ballroom was stunning in the way some rooms are so beautiful they almost feel cold. Crystal chandeliers. Cream floral arrangements. Tall windows reflecting the last blue light of evening. A string quartet playing something soft enough to sound classy and expensive without asking anyone to really listen. Every detail had been handled. Every candle the same height. Every napkin folded the same way. Vanessa loved rooms like that. Rooms where nothing was left to chance. Except me. I sat down and smoothed my napkin over my lap. From table 14 I had a perfect view of the head table if I leaned slightly left, and a perfect view of the server station if I leaned slightly right. That felt about right for my place in the family. Close enough to witness. Close enough to be used. Never close enough to belong. Monica spotted me from across the room before Vanessa did. Her eyes moved over me in one quick sweep. Hair. Dress. Earrings. Shoes. Assessment complete. Then she leaned toward Vanessa and murmured something. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder at me for less than a second, then turned back to the woman she'd been charming near the bar. I knew that look. It meant, she's acceptable. Not welcome. Not loved. Not even forgiven for whatever offense they had already decided I represented by showing up. Just acceptable enough not to ruin the room. Dinner started 20 minutes later. Salad first. Then sea bass or filet mignon. Waiters moved in perfect lines, clearing and replacing silverware with the kind of choreography that only exists at places where rich people say things like lovely service and actually mean it. At table 14, conversation stayed shallow. Avery told me she was studying communications at UConn. The silver dress woman asked whether I lived nearby. When I said I worked in emergency medicine, she smiled politely and said, "That must be intense." It was the kind of answer people give when they want credit for respect without having to imagine what your life actually looks like. Before I could say anything else, the room began to quiet. Vanessa had taken the microphone. She stood near the dance floor in a pale silk dress that skimmed the floor and caught the candlelight every time she moved. Her hair was pinned in a style that looked effortless only because it had probably taken 2 hours. She held the microphone the way she held everything when she had an audience, with total confidence that the room belonged to her. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, smiling around the room. Warm. Polished. Gracious. That was Vanessa's real talent. Not cruelty. Presentation. She could make a blade feel like etiquette. She started introducing the people who had helped shape this beautiful journey. Her words, not mine. She thanked Monica first, of course. "My mom," she said, hand pressed lightly to her chest. "The woman who taught me grace, resilience, and how to create beauty wherever she goes." People clapped. Monica looked moved in a way that would have been convincing if I hadn't watched her spend 20 years closing doors quietly in my face. Then Vanessa turned to my father. "And Daniel," she said with a smile that softened, just enough to look heartfelt. "Thank you for always showing up for me and for loving me like I was your own." That one got a bigger reaction. I watched my father laugh, touched and proud, raising his glass like he had just been awarded something. And maybe he had. Maybe this was what he had always wanted. A daughter easy to celebrate. A version of family with polished edges. A life where he never had to explain the first child who made him uncomfortable simply by needing things he wasn't willing to give. Vanessa kept going. Bridesmaids. College roommate. Wedding planner. Ethan's parents. Ethan. Each introduction landed exactly the way she intended. Light laugh here. Pause there. A little story. A little charm. By the time she turned her head toward the back half of the room, the audience was fully hers. I knew somehow that my turn was coming. Not because I expected kindness. Because Vanessa never left loose ends in public. She tied them into bows. "And this," she said, her voice bright as she looked toward table 14, "is my stepsister Lauren." A pause. Small. Perfectly timed. The kind of pause that tells a room a joke is coming. "She's just a nurse." A few people laughed instantly because Vanessa smiled when she said it. A few more laughed because they heard other people laugh. And then my father laughed. Not a polite little chuckle. A real laugh. Open. Easy. Immediate. The kind that comes out when something feels true. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Because that would have hurt more than the words. Monica didn't laugh out loud. She just gave that tiny curved smile. The one that always meant she approved but wanted plausible deniability later. I sat very still. My fingers were under the table again, pressed into my palms hard enough to leave marks. Across from me, Avery froze with her water glass halfway to her mouth. The woman in silver looked down at her plate. Someone near the center tables let out one last uncomfortable laugh that died faster than it began. Vanessa moved on quickly, like the remark had been harmless. Like she had merely acknowledged a fact. Like I was the sort of thing one mentions before returning to the real program. But something had changed in the room. Not for everyone. Most people were already letting pass. That's what crowds do. They take their cues from power. If the bride makes a joke, people decide it must be safe. But at the head table, one person had gone very still. Charles Calloway. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't talking. He was looking straight at me. Not casually. Not politely. Intently. Like the phrase just a nurse had struck something in him, and sent it echoing backward through time. His champagne glass sat untouched by his hand. Beside him Elise said something I couldn't hear. But he didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on me for one long second, then another. And for the second time since I'd been at the Calloway estate, I had the unmistakable feeling that this man was trying to place me. Vanessa wrapped up her speech to a round of applause. The quartet started again. Conversations restarted in careful waves. Silverware moved. Chairs shifted. The room performed recovery as if nothing ugly had just happened. That's the thing about public humiliation. If you don't react, people are very happy to pretend it never happened. A few minutes later, one of Vanessa's friends drifted over to our table with a wine glass in her hand. Blonde, glossy, probably mid-40s, the kind of woman who said darling like punctuation. So, she said, glancing at me, you're the nurse. There was a little smile on her face. Curious. Superior. Bored. I looked up at her. I am. She nodded toward the head table. That must be nice. Steady work. Steady work. I almost admired the insult for trying so hard to sound respectable. I held her gaze. Last month I helped crack a man's chest open in a trauma bay, so the surgeon could repair a lacerated ventricle before he bled out. Her smile disappeared. Avery stopped chewing. The woman in silver turned toward me fully for the first time all night. I took a sip of water and set the glass down gently. So yes, I said. Very steady. The blonde woman made a strange little sound in her throat, muttered something about finding her seat, and walked away. And from across the room, I felt Vanessa's attention snap toward me. Not because I had raised my voice. Not because I had caused a scene. Because for 10 seconds I had spoken like someone who knew exactly who she was. She crossed the ballroom with the calm speed of a woman smiling for other people while heading toward a fire only she can see. When she reached my table, her expression was smooth enough that anyone watching would have thought she was checking in. Lauren, she said lightly, can I talk to you for a second? I stood. She didn't touch me, but she didn't need to. The pressure was already there, guiding me out of the ballroom, down a hallway, and toward the women's restroom. The door closed behind us with a soft click. Vanessa turned to face me, and for the first time that night the smile came off completely. Vanessa stood with her back to the restroom door, one hand still on the brass handle. Her smile gone so fast it was like watching stage lights switch off. The room around us was all polished stone and soft lighting. White marble counters. Folded hand towels. A vase of peonies that probably cost more than my electric bill. Even the soap dispensers looked expensive. Vanessa belonged in rooms like that. Or at least she had taught herself to. What was that? She asked. Her voice was low, controlled, the way people sound when they are furious but more afraid of being overheard than of being cruel. I looked at her in the mirror rather than turning around fully. You asked me to come out here for that? You know exactly what I mean. No, I said. I don't. That was a lie, of course. I knew. She took 2 small steps toward me, careful not to wrinkle her dress. You don't tell dinner guests stories like that. I blinked at her. Stories. Her jaw tightened. About cracked chests and blood and whatever else you think makes you sound important. There it was. Not concern. Not embarrassment over the comment she had made into a microphone 10 minutes earlier. What bothered her was that for a few seconds, someone else in the room had looked at me and seen more than the version she had prepared for them. I turned then, leaning lightly against the counter. It's not a story, I said. It's my job. Vanessa let out one sharp breath through her nose. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't know how to read a room. I actually laughed at that quietly. You introduced me as just a nurse in front of everyone. She tipped her head, not ashamed, not even defensive. Just annoyed that I was making her say obvious things out loud. And you laughed. It was a joke. No, I said. It wasn't. She folded her arms. That posture took me back 20 years in an instant. Vanessa at 12, standing in my bedroom doorway after borrowing a sweater without asking. Vanessa at 16 telling Monica I was being dramatic. Vanessa at 22, announcing something at Thanksgiving and expecting the room to reorganize itself around her mood before dessert hit the table. Same expression. Same certainty. Only the dress was different now. You always do this, she said. You take one small thing and make it heavy. I stared at her. One small thing. It's amazing how often cruel people rely on size to erase meaning. One comment. One joke. One seat at the wrong table. One forgotten name. One photo cropped the wrong way. One omission in a speech. One lie told to smooth things over. A life can disappear inside enough one small things. What did you tell the Callaways about me? I asked. She went completely still. For the first time since we stepped into that restroom, something real crossed her face. Not guilt. Not exactly. Calculation. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. She looked away first only for a second, but I saw it. And I knew. I thought of the brunch. Of the tone people had used with me. The careful politeness. The distance dressed up as courtesy. Ethan smiling in that restrained, uncertain way. Charles Calloway studying me like a memory he couldn't place. Monica's texts. My father's silence on the phone. I took a breath. Did you tell them I have some kind of problem? Vanessa's voice flattened. I told them what they needed to hear. The sentence landed so coldly that for a second even I didn't fully absorb it. What? She lifted one shoulder. You're private. You're awkward. You disappear for months. You don't exactly make people comfortable, Lauren. I work nights in an emergency department. That's not the point. No, I said, feeling my pulse in my throat now. The point is that you lied. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. I managed the narrative, she said. There's a difference. I almost said something then, something loud and ugly and overdue. But years of training held. Hospital training. Family training. The discipline of not making a bad moment harder to survive. So I stayed very still. She mistook that for weakness the way she always had. You have no idea how much work has gone into this wedding, she said. How much effort it has taken to make everything feel right. Feel right. Not be right. I understood that distinction better than she realized. Vanessa had spent years building surfaces. The right clothes. The right man. The right family story. The right tone. The right distance between truth and presentation so that no one would look too closely at what was underneath. I had always been dangerous to that because I remembered the original structure. The small house in Milford. My father coming home in work shirts that smelled like cardboard and dust from the hardware store. Monica stacking grocery store sheet cakes in our fridge before neighborhood parties. Vanessa practicing introductions in the mirror before church dinners. None of it shameful. None of it the polished mythology she now preferred. What exactly did you tell them? I asked again. She met my eyes in the mirror. That you have emotional issues, she said. She said it plainly now, like the lie had become safe enough to name. I felt my hand press against the cool marble edge of the counter. Why? Because they asked. People don't just ask if someone has emotional issues. They asked why you're never around, she snapped. Why you seem distant. Why you weren't in half the family stories I told. So I gave them something simple. Something simple. A clean explanation for my absence. A polished excuse for why I was missing from the picture she had sold them. And suddenly it all fit together so neatly I almost felt sick. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being rewritten. In her version, I wasn't the daughter my father had failed. I wasn't the nurse who worked holidays and overnights and came home too tired to answer holiday group texts full of posed family pictures I hadn't been invited to. I wasn't the woman she had quietly pushed to the edge of every room for 20 years. I was simply unstable. Difficult. Handled from a distance. Something to account for and then move past. You made me into a warning label, I said. Vanessa gave a thin smile. Don't be dramatic. That word again. Dramatic. Sensitive. Private. Difficult. Different wrappers on the same old message. Make yourself smaller so I don't have to explain you. I looked at her and for the first time in a long time, I felt something in me stop trying to be understood. What about Dad? I asked. Did he know? She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. Of course he knew, I said softly. Vanessa adjusted one of her earrings in the mirror, as if we were discussing seating cards and not my entire place in the family. He agreed that it was better not to complicate things. Better not to complicate things. My father's voice was in that sentence even though he wasn't in the room. His favorite form of betrayal had always been silence. Not loud cruelty. Not open rejection. Just the quiet permission that lets someone else do the damage. A knock sounded at the restroom door. Monica's voice followed, gentle and false through the wood. Everything okay in there? Vanessa didn't look away from me. Fine, she called back, then lowered her voice again. Listen carefully. Tomorrow is my wedding. You will sit where you're placed. You will smile when appropriate. You will not discuss your work, your feelings, or anything else that makes people uncomfortable. And you will stay away from Ethan's family unless they speak to you first. I held her gaze. Why? Because, she said, stepping closer, each word clipped and quiet. You need to know your place. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Not wrapped in etiquette. The truth of our family in 6 words. Know your place. The funny thing is, when someone finally says out loud what they've been showing you your whole life, it doesn't always break you. Sometimes it clears the room. I looked at Vanessa, at the flawless dress, the perfect hair, the mouth shaped around certainty, and I realized something with a calm so deep it almost felt like relief. She was not afraid I would ruin her wedding. She was afraid I might exist in it as my full self. That was the threat. Not chaos. Truth. Monica knocked again, a little harder this time. Girls. Vanessa stepped back, smoothed her face, and when she opened the door the bride returned instantly. Composed, bright, effortless. Monica glanced between us. Everything all right? Just sister stuff, Vanessa said. With a little laugh. Monica's eyes moved to me, searching for signs of rebellion the way some people check weather before an outdoor event. I gave her nothing. That unsettled her more than tears would have. Good, she said softly. Big day tomorrow. She meant, do not make this harder for us. They left together, Vanessa in front, Monica half a step behind, both of them drifting back toward the ballroom and the version of the evening they preferred. I stayed in the restroom alone. For a long moment, I just stood there with both hands on the marble counter, and looked at my own face in the mirror. Then I touched the pearl earring in my left ear. My mother's. Small. White. Steady. The only person in that family who had ever said my name like it was something worth keeping. When I finally walked back into the ballroom, dinner was moving on without me, just as it always had. But something had changed. Not in them. In me. Because once someone tells you clearly exactly where they believe you belong, you stop wasting your life hoping they'll make room. When I came back into the ballroom, no one asked where I'd been. That didn't surprise me. In families like mine, absence is only noticed when it inconveniences the people doing the excluding. The quartet was still playing. Servers were clearing the dinner plates. A fresh round of drinks had appeared on tables as if by magic. Vanessa was back near the center of the room, smiling at someone from Ethan's law firm, one hand resting lightly on his sleeve, already folded seamlessly back into the version of herself she wanted the room to see. Perfect bride. Polished daughter. Warm future daughter-in-law. And I understood something with a clarity that felt almost cold. She wasn't performing because she was false all the time. She was performing because performance had worked for her all her life. I returned to table 14, sat down, and reached for my water glass. Avery glanced at me, then quickly looked away. The silver dress woman pretended to be interested in the dessert fork arrangement. No one asked whether I was okay. People almost never do when the answer might become socially inconvenient. That's the thing about humiliation in nice rooms. It gets absorbed into the decor. If the linens are expensive enough and the candles are flattering enough, people start acting like cruelty is just a misunderstanding with better lighting. A server set down dessert in front of us. Vanilla bean panna cotta with berry compote. and a shard of sugar balanced on top like something too delicate to survive a real kitchen. I looked at it for a second and thought about the protein bar I'd eaten standing up at the nurse's station 2 nights earlier. I wasn't hungry. Across the room, I saw Charles Calloway stand from the head table. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the quiet purpose of a man following a thought he hadn't finished yet. He moved through the room table by table, stopping to shake hands, smiling at older relatives, thanking people for coming. To anyone else, he probably looked like a gracious host doing exactly what a gracious host should do. But twice while he was speaking to other people, I caught him looking toward me. Not in the curious way strangers sometimes look at the odd person at the edge of a room. In the searching way. As if somewhere behind his eyes, a memory was turning over slowly and refusing to settle. I lowered my gaze to my plate. Sometimes being watched can feel too much like being seen, and I wasn't ready yet to trust either one. A few minutes later, Ethan came to our table. He was holding a drink he didn't seem to be drinking. His tie was slightly loosened now, as if the evening had shifted from formal to personal in a way he wasn't fully comfortable with. "Everything okay over here?" he asked. Avery nodded immediately. The silver dress woman smiled. I looked up at him. "Fine." He hesitated. It was small but I noticed. In the ER, I notice hesitations for a living. The half-second before someone faints. The pause before a patient says actually there's one more symptom. The silence before a family member asks whether dying will hurt. Ethan had that same half-second in him now. "I'm glad you came," he said. The sentence sounded sincere. That was almost worse. Because sincerity coming late still has a way of highlighting everything it missed earlier. "Are you?" I asked. His expression shifted just slightly. Not defensive. Not offended. Just caught off guard by a direct answer in a room built on soft ones. Before he could say anything, Vanessa appeared. Beside him. Not rushed. Not visibly tense. Just exactly on time, the way she always was when control needed restoring. "There you are," she said to Ethan, touching his arm with easy familiarity before looking at me. "Lauren, I hope you're having a nice evening." A nice evening. I held her gaze for one beat too long. Then I said, "It's been memorable." Vanessa smiled. So did I. That was the closest we had ever come to honesty in public. Ethan looked between us, sensing something without understanding the shape of it. Vanessa steered him away with one graceful movement, and within seconds they were absorbed again into a circle of guests near the dance floor. Avery let out a breath after they left. "Your sister seems," she began then stopped. I looked at her. She gave a tiny wince. "I don't know. Intense." I almost laughed. That was generous enough to qualify as mercy. "She likes things managed," I said. Avery nodded like that explained it. Maybe it did. At 9:30 the room began to loosen. The older relatives started leaving. The music shifted. Laughter rose a little louder from the bar area. A few people drifted onto the dance floor. The waitstaff moved with less ceremony now, collecting empty glasses and folding quiet efficiency around the edges of the party. I should have left then. I knew that. I could have slipped out unnoticed, driven home, taken out my earrings, scrubbed my face clean, and told myself I had survived another family performance without bleeding too obviously in public. Instead I stayed. Partly because I was tired of leaving rooms they had already pushed me out of. Partly because Charles Calloway still had not stopped looking at me like I belonged to a question he had almost answered. And partly because once someone tells you to know your place, something stubborn in you starts wanting to test the borders of the map they drew. I stood and crossed the room toward the terrace doors. The night outside was cooler than I expected. The country club grounds were lit with strings of soft white lights wrapped around trees and stone lanterns placed along the path. Beyond the patio, the lawn stretched dark and quiet. I took a breath and leaned against the railing. Inside, through the glass, I could still see the blur of candlelight and moving dresses and men in tuxedos holding drinks like props in a play they had performed many times before. The door opened behind me. I knew before I turned that it wasn't Vanessa. She would never come outside alone unless she needed to deliver a line. It was my father. He stepped onto the terrace with a tumbler in one hand, and that tired expression men like him wear when they want credit for discomfort without taking responsibility for causing it. "There you are," he said. I didn't answer. He came to stand beside me, though not too close. Even now, even after everything, there was always a distance with him. Not just physical. Something older. A habit of emotional retreat he had turned into personality. "You doing okay?" he asked. There are questions people ask because they care about the answer. And there are questions people ask so they can say later that they tried. I looked out at the lawn. "Did you laugh because you thought it was funny?" He exhaled, already annoyed. "Lauren." "No," I said. "Really. I want to know." He took a sip of his drink first. Bought himself time. "That's not how she meant it." I turned to look at him. It's strange how one sentence can still hurt, even when you expect it. Not how she meant it. As if intention mattered more than impact. As if cruelty became harmless if delivered in a satin dress with a microphone. She said I was just a nurse. She was joking. You laughed. His jaw tightened. That meant yes. It also meant he wanted this to end quickly. "I don't want to do this tonight," he said. Of course he didn't. Men like my father never want to do this tonight. Or tomorrow. Or ever. They wait out pain the way some people wait out bad weather, convinced that if they stay still long enough, the storm will move on without requiring anything from them. "That's convenient," I said quietly. He looked at me, then really looked, and for one flicker of a second I thought I saw guilt. Not enough to change him. Just enough to confirm he understood. "She's under pressure," he said. "The wedding, Ethan's family, all of it. You know how Vanessa gets." I stared at him. There it was again. The family translation system. Vanessa humiliates me publicly, and somehow the real issue becomes that I should be more understanding of her stress. "When I was in nursing school," I said. "Do you remember my pinning ceremony?" He frowned slightly, thrown by the change. "What?" "My pinning ceremony," I repeated. "Do you remember it?" His silence answered before he did. "I had work," he said finally. "No. You didn't." He opened his mouth. "You forgot," I said. He looked away. And there, in that tiny movement, was our whole relationship. He had not chosen me for years. Not loudly. Not once and for all. Just steadily enough that the pattern had become a life. The terrace door opened again before either of us could say more. Monica's voice floated out, warm and smooth. "Daniel, sweetheart, they're looking for you for the toast." Of course they were. He glanced toward the door, toward rescue, toward the easier room. Then back at me. I waited. Not for an apology. By then I knew better. Just to see which direction he would choose. And like always, he chose the room behind him. When Monica called my father back inside, he didn't hesitate. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the excuse. Not the look on his face. Not even the fact that he still hadn't answered a single real question. It was how easy it was for him to leave. He gave me one of those small, tight nods men use when they want to imply the conversation is unfinished for reasons beyond their control, not because they have chosen not to finish it. Then he turned, stepped through the terrace doors, and disappeared back into the warm golden light of the ballroom. Back to Monica. Back to Vanessa. Back to the version of family where I was always the thing easiest to step around. I stayed outside another minute, maybe two. The night air was cool enough to settle my skin, but not enough to calm what had started moving in me since the restroom. "Know your place." I kept hearing Vanessa say it. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. That was the real damage of it. When the cruelest thing someone says only confirms what they've shown you for 20 years, there's no shock left. Just clarity. I went back inside before anyone could come looking for me, though I knew they wouldn't. The ballroom had shifted into the next phase of the evening. Chairs angled differently. Conversations had gotten louder. A few older guests had slipped out. The quartet was gone now, replaced by a low playlist moving through the speakers, something jazzy and forgettable that made the room feel expensive without demanding attention. At the front, near the dance floor, a member of the country club staff was adjusting a microphone stand. Toast time. Of course. I returned to table 14, but I didn't sit right away. I stood behind the chair for a second and looked around the room. Vanessa was near the center again, radiant and composed, her hand resting on Ethan's forearm while she listened to someone from his side of the family with that perfect attentive expression she used when she wanted older wealthy people to think she had depth. Monica was smiling beside her, one hand against her collarbone, as if every compliment to Vanessa was entering her bloodstream directly. My father stood half a step behind them, drink gone now, posture adjusted, face smoothed over. Back in position. I sat. Avery leaned toward me slightly. Are you okay? It was the first honest question anyone had asked me all night. I looked at her and almost told the truth. No, I was not okay. My stepsister had just told me she'd labeled me emotionally unstable to make me easier to hide. My father had confirmed it without using the words. My stepmother had walked in and out of every ugly moment like a stage manager making sure the curtains stayed closed. But nice rooms punish honesty. So I gave her the version people can tolerate. I'm fine, I said. She nodded, relieved. The first toast came from Ethan's college friend Tyler. It was exactly what you'd expect. Funny story from freshman year. Brief roast. Compliment to the couple. Warm applause. Then Monica was invited up by Vanessa with a hand to her heart and a laugh into the mic that made the room soften on cue. Monica gave a speech about watching Vanessa grow into grace. Grace. That word nearly made me choke on my water. She talked about how Vanessa lit up every room she entered. How she had always known her daughter was meant for something beautiful. How proud she was to see her begin this next chapter surrounded by people who truly saw her. That line landed harder than the rest. Surrounded by people who truly saw her. The room murmured with approval. Vanessa dabbed lightly at the corner of one eye, careful not to ruin anything. Ethan smiled. My father looked emotional in the way men sometimes do when a speech flatters their choices without naming them. Then came my father. Vanessa introduced him as the man who taught me what steady love looks like. I don't know whether she believed that or just knew it would work. Probably both. He took the mic with a smile that looked almost bashful, and for a second I remembered the version of him I used to wait for as a child. The father who let me sit on the hardware store counter and sort paint swatches by color. The father who once made me grilled cheese at 10 at night when I couldn't sleep after Mom died. The father I kept trying to find long after he had been replaced by someone easier, quieter, less brave. He cleared his throat and started talking about Vanessa. About her generosity. Her determination. Her gift for bringing people together. I sat there listening to him describe a woman I knew mostly as strategic, image-conscious, and incapable of letting another person occupy emotional space she hadn't approved first. And then he said, "She's the heart of this family." That was when something inside me went very still. Not cracked. Not shattered. Still. Because maybe there are only so many times you can hear yourself erase before your pain stops reaching outward and starts settling into shape. The room applauded. Monica touched his arm when he returned to the table. Vanessa kissed his cheek. And suddenly I could see the architecture of it all so clearly that it almost became simple. Vanessa wasn't just protected. She was endorsed. Every lie about me had been reinforced by smaller lies about her. The generous one. The graceful one. The daughter who united people. The bride who only wanted peace. The woman under pressure. If I reacted, I would become unstable. If I stayed quiet, I would become invisible. That was the trap. That had always been the trap. By the time dessert plates were fully cleared, I had already decided I wasn't staying much longer. Not because I was defeated. Because I was done offering myself up to be measured against a fiction. I reached for my purse under the table and slipped my phone inside it. I could leave before the dancing started. Drive home. Wash my face. Sleep for 4 hours if I was lucky. Pick up coffee on the way to the hospital in the morning. Step back into the one life I had built that did not require me to apologize for existing. Then I felt it. Not a touch. A presence. I looked up. Charles Calloway was standing beside table 14. He wasn't smiling in the automatic host way he had used with other guests. He wasn't holding a drink either. His expression was serious but not cold. Careful. Like a man walking toward a thought he had finally decided to trust. "Lauren," he said. It startled me that he knew my name. I stood automatically. "Mr. Calloway." "Charles, please." He glanced at the empty chair beside me. "Do you mind if I sit down for a moment?" Avery looked like she wanted to disappear into the linen. The silver dress woman immediately became fascinated by something across the room. "Of course," I said. He sat beside me, not across, and folded his hands loosely in front of him. For a few seconds he said nothing. That silence didn't feel awkward. It felt deliberate. Then he looked at me directly and said, "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but have we met before?" There it was again. That same question from the study. Only now it carried more weight. "I don't think so," I said. "At least, I don't remember meeting you." He nodded slowly, as if that answer both helped and didn't. "I asked because you seem familiar to me in a way I can't quite place." He paused. And when Vanessa said what she said earlier, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. When Vanessa said what she said earlier, just a nurse. I waited. Charles looked toward the head table briefly, then back at me. 3 years ago, I was in a serious car accident on I-95. My hand tightened around the stem of my water glass. Something cold moved through me. Not recognition yet. Just the sensation of a locked memory shifting on its hinges. He continued, voice steady. A tractor trailer lost control in heavy rain. There were multiple vehicles involved. My car took the worst of it. I could hear the room. Around us, the cutlery, the low music, someone laughing too loudly near the bar. But it all seemed to move farther away. I was trapped, he said. Couldn't move. Barely breathe. And before the paramedics got there, he stopped, studying my face again. Someone stayed with me. I looked at him. He wasn't guessing anymore. He was circling. Carefully. Respectfully. But circling. A woman, he said. Medical training. Calm voice. Young. His eyes flicked once toward my ears. She kept talking to me so I wouldn't lose consciousness. Without thinking, my hand rose to touch my left pearl earring. A small gesture. Instinctive. And the moment I did it, something in Charles's face changed. Not certainty, but closeness to it. My God, he said very quietly. Across the room I saw Vanessa glance our way. Then Ethan. Then Monica. It was only a second, but I felt the attention start to tilt. The room hadn't changed yet. Not fully, but the air had. I lowered my hand slowly. Mr. Calloway. Charles kept looking at me like he was standing on the edge of a memory that had haunted him for years. And for the first time all night, I understood that whatever happened next was not going to stay small. Charles kept his voice low, but not low enough to erase the weight of what he was saying. I've thought about that night more times than I can count, he said. You don't forget a moment like that. You don't forget when your life is hanging by a thread, and a stranger refuses to let go. I looked at him, and for a second the ballroom blurred around the edges. Not because I was emotional, because memory was starting to move. Not all at once. Not cleanly. More like headlights in rain. Broken flashes. Sound before image. Wet pavement. The smell of gasoline. Red taillights smeared across black highway like paint dragged by a shaking hand. I set my glass down carefully. What night? Charles studied me. I think he knew I was asking because I needed time, not because I didn't understand. November 14th, he said. 3 years ago. Late. Heavy rain. Southbound on I-95. And there it was. A date can open a locked room in your mind faster than a name ever could. My body remembered before my mouth did. I remember driving home after a double shift still. In scrubs under my coat. Knuckles stiff around the steering wheel because the rain had gotten so hard the highway looked almost liquid. I remembered the brake lights ahead. Then none. Then too many. Then the impossible shape of metal where traffic should have been. I remembered pulling over before I had fully decided to. Hazard lights on. Phone in my hand calling 911 while already running toward the wreckage. I remembered shouting into the dark for anyone conscious enough to answer. And then I remembered a voice. Male. Weak. Controlled only because it was trying not to panic. I looked back at Charles. His face had changed completely now. The host was gone. The businessman was gone. What sat beside me was a man standing close to one of the worst nights of his life. I was on my way home from the hospital, I said slowly. Across the room, Vanessa was no longer pretending not to watch. Neither was Monica. Ethan had turned halfway in our direction. His conversation with one of the groomsmen clearly forgotten. My father was still at the head table, but I could feel his attention shifting even before he looked over. Charles leaned in slightly. Not intrusive. focused. You came to the driver's side window, he said. You told me not to move my head. My pulse kicked once hard. Rain hammering glass. A windshield split like ice. Blood in someone's hair. Not dramatic. Just enough to make everything look more serious than you wanted it to be. Yes, I said. My own voice sounded strange to me. Quieter than the room. Truer than I wanted it to be. You were pinned, I said. The steering column had collapsed inward. Charles closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them again, they were bright. I knew it, he said. No triumph in it. Just certainty. Relief. The kind of relief people feel when grief finally makes sense in the shape they have carried it. Avery beside me had stopped all pretense of looking elsewhere. The silver dress woman wasn't even trying anymore. At the nearest table, 2 guests had gone still in that polite way people do when they know something important is happening and want permission to witness it. Charles lowered his voice further, but somehow that made the moment louder. You kept talking to me, he said. The paramedics later told me that mattered. That if I had slipped under before they cut me out, I might not have come back. The ballroom seemed to shrink. Not literally, but socially. The way rooms do when status shifts and everyone can feel it before anyone names it. I swallowed. There were other people hurt. I just stayed with the one I could reach. Charles shook his head once, already rejecting the instinct to minimize. No, he said. You stayed with me. That line landed in me harder than I expected. Because in my family, staying had never counted if it came from me. Holding things together. Showing up. Enduring quietly. Making myself useful. Those things had never translated into value in the rooms that raised me. But here was this man, in the middle of the very kind of room Vanessa had built her life around, saying it as if it meant something undeniable. You stayed with me. My fingers moved to my left earring again before I realized I was doing it. Pearl. Cool against my skin. Charles saw the gesture and inhaled sharply. That's it, he said. I frowned slightly. What? The earrings. For a second I thought he meant the ones I was wearing tonight. That would have been strange enough. But then he kept speaking. You told me about your mother's pearl earrings, he said. That night. You said she wore them every day. You kept describing them to me so I would focus on something small and steady instead of the pain. The memory came back so fast it almost hurt. His breathing had been shallow. Too fast. His hands had been trapped where I couldn't reach them, so I'd knelt in the rain with one hand stabilizing his neck through the broken angle of the seat, and the other braced against twisted metal, and I had talked. That's what trauma nurses do when nothing else is available yet. We talk people toward the next minute. Then the next. Then the next. I had told him about my mother because it was what came into my head under pressure. About how she never took those earrings off. About how when I was little I used to think pearls looked like tiny moons. About how calm can be borrowed from memory if your body doesn't have any left. I stared at Charles. Oh my God, I whispered. He gave the smallest nod. Yes. The room around us had fully shifted now. No one had announced anything. No glasses had been tapped. No spotlight had turned. But the current had changed. At the head table, Ethan was openly watching. Vanessa's expression had gone fixed in the way people's faces do when they are trying to hold a smile in place while a script is falling apart inside their head. Monica leaned toward my father and said something tight and fast. He looked over. And for the first time that entire evening, my father's face showed something other than avoidance. Confusion first. Then recognition of danger. Not danger to me. Danger to the story. Charles sat back slightly, but he didn't take his eyes off me. Why didn't you ever contact me? He asked. There was no accusation in it. Only wonder. I almost laughed, but it would have sounded too tired. I didn't know who you were, I said. There were multiple vehicles. I left when EMS took over. Then I worked the next day. That part was true too. People love the idea of rescue stories more than the reality of them. In reality, you kneel in the rain, keep someone alive, give report, drive home soaked and shaking, sleep 4 hours if you can, then show up again because the next patient doesn't care what heroics you performed yesterday. Charles looked at me like that answer humbled him. My wife framed the article, he said quietly. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman who stayed. He paused. I looked for you for months. I didn't know what to do with that. No one in my family had looked for me a day in their lives unless they needed compliance. And suddenly, in the middle of the most humiliating weekend Vanessa had orchestrated for me, a man at the center of her new world was speaking to me like my existence had mattered long before tonight. I glanced toward the head table again. Vanessa was already moving. Not toward me. Toward Ethan. Toward containment. That told me everything. She didn't know exactly what Charles remembered yet, but she knew enough to be afraid of it. Charles followed my line of sight and seemed to understand something too. His expression changed. Not softer. Sharper. What exactly? He said, now with a kind of dangerous calm. Did your sister mean when she called you just a nurse? I looked at him. At the ballroom. At my father, now half risen from his seat. At Monica, lips pressed flat. At Vanessa, whispering urgently to Ethan with that smile still pinned to her face like a piece of glass. And I realized the room was no longer waiting for Vanessa to define me. It was waiting for the truth. I should tell you I had imagined that moment before. Not this exact one. Not Charles Calloway sitting at table 14 with half the room pretending not to stare while the truth pressed against the walls. But I had imagined in smaller private ways what it might feel like for someone to finally ask the right question. What did she mean? Because that was always the wound, wasn't it? Not just that Vanessa insulted me. Not just that my father laughed. It was that for years people accepted the version of me they were handed without ever asking who had written it. Charles did. And once he asked, the room changed. I looked at him, then at the head table, then back down at my hands for a second. My fingers were resting against the linen, close to the water glass, steady the way they always were when a room needed me to say something cleanly. My sister means, I said, that she's spent years trying to make me sound smaller than I am. Charles didn't interrupt. Neither did anyone else nearby. The room hadn't gone fully silent, not yet, but it had thinned. The volume had dropped in that particular way elegant rooms go quiet when people sense a shift in status and don't want to miss where it lands. I went on. I'm an ER trauma nurse at St. Catherine Regional. I work overnights, weekends, holidays. I've been doing it for years. I glanced once toward Vanessa, who was now standing very still beside Ethan, her smile no longer reaching anywhere near her eyes. But in my family, that's never sounded impressive enough. Charles's jaw tightened. Not on my behalf alone, I think. On behalf of every false thing that was now starting to reveal itself around him. And the rest? He asked quietly. The distance. The way they speak about you. There was no accusation in his tone. No gossip hunger either. Just a serious man who had nearly died once and no longer had much patience for polished lies. I took a breath. They told people I was private, I said. Sensitive. Difficult. That I had emotional issues. Avery sucked in a tiny breath beside me. At the nearest table, someone set down a fork a little too hard. Charles did not look away from me. Was that true? No, the word came out flat and easy. Because the truth becomes simple once you stop asking permission to say it. My mother died when I was 7, I said. My father remarried. My stepsister became the center of everything, and I became the detail the family learned to manage. Across the room, Monica had turned pale in a very controlled way. The kind of pale women like her wear like they are above conflict rather than inside it. Vanessa started moving toward us then. Not quickly enough to look panicked. Not slowly enough to look casual. Ethan followed half a step behind, his face unreadable now in that polished, attorney way some men have when they realize a conversation has more legal and moral layers than they were initially told. My father, I continued, because I had already spent too many years stopping when they entered a room, chose the easiest version of peace. My stepmother chose appearances. And Vanessa learned early that if she smiled while she said something cruel, most people would call it confidence. Charles turned slightly in his chair as Vanessa approached. Lauren, Vanessa said, voice bright, carrying just enough to sound gracious. There you are. Charles, I hope she's not keeping you from your other guests. It was a good line. Warm on the surface. Redirective underneath. That was Vanessa's gift. She could wrap a command in satin and call it charm. Charles looked up at her, and what I saw on his face then was not confusion anymore. It was assessment. No, he said. She isn't. The sentence was polite. The tone was not. Vanessa's smile held, but only because she had years of practice forcing one to stay in place. Ethan stepped in carefully. Everything okay? Charles stood then, slow enough that nobody could accuse him of making a scene, but definite enough that the motion itself became one. I was just speaking with Lauren, he said, about the accident on I-95. That did it. Not loudly, but thoroughly. The room did not freeze. All at once. It tightened. Heads turned. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Even people too far away to hear the exact words could feel the shape of something happening. Vanessa looked at me, then at Charles, then at Ethan. For the first time that night, I saw something crack clean through her composure. Not shame. Fear. Because she still did not know exactly how much he remembered. Only that whatever he remembered did not belong to the version of me she had sold this family. Ethan frowned. What accident? Charles kept his eyes on Vanessa when he answered. The one where your future sister-in-law kept me alive until paramedics arrived. No one moved. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to silence. It belongs to recalculation. I felt it go through the room like a current. At the head table, my father had fully stood up now. Monica stayed seated only because getting up too fast would have looked worse. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Vanessa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. A weak move. She knew it the second it left her mouth. Oh my God, she said. Of course Lauren would never mention something like that. She's so humble. It was fast. Too fast. An attempt to absorb the truth before it could turn against her. To reposition herself near it. To make herself look admiring instead of threatened. I almost would have respected the speed if it hadn't been so familiar. Charles didn't smile. That's interesting, he said. Vanessa blinked. He continued in that same even tone, one that somehow cut deeper because it never rose. Because earlier tonight, you introduced her as just a nurse. Ethan looked at Vanessa then. Really looked. I watched the question begin behind his eyes. Vanessa opened her mouth, but for once she seemed to understand that every available answer was bad. It was a joke, she said at last. That word again. The shelter cruel people run to when the room stops protecting them. Charles nodded once, slowly, like he was filing the statement away somewhere permanent. I see. And somehow those two words landed harder than shouting would have. Because wealthy, controlled men like Charles do not need to raise their voices when they are disappointed. Rooms like this bend around their restraint. Vanessa's voice sharpened despite herself. I didn't mean anything by it. I found myself almost detached then, almost calm. There is a point in some emergencies where panic burns off and all that remains is sequence. First this, then that, then the truth. I stood. Not dramatically. Not to challenge anyone. Just because I was tired of speaking upward from the edge of the room. I think you did, I said. Every eye near us came to me. Vanessa's did too, and there it was again, that old family expectation that I would back down once enough people were watching. I didn't. You didn't just say it tonight, I said. You built it. The whole thing. The distance. The missing photos. The story that I'm unstable, hard to explain. Better kept on the edges so no one asks questions. Ethan turned toward her fully now. What? Vanessa's head snapped toward him. That's not what It is, I said, and my own voice surprised me with how steady it was. You told people what they needed to hear, so they wouldn't wonder why I wasn't included. Monica was moving toward us now, finally. My father too. Containment team. Too late. Lauren, Monica said, low and warning. This is not the time. I looked at her. And for the first time in years I didn't feel 12 when I did it. No, I said. The problem is that for people like you, it's never the time. That landed. Not because it was loud. Because it was true. My father stopped a few feet away. His face caught between anger and dread. Let's not do this here. I turned to him. You already did it here, I said. When you laughed. That one hit him harder than anything else had. I saw it. Flicker. A flinch. The recognition that some betrayals sound very different when spoken plainly in public. Around us the entire wedding felt suspended now. Candles still burning. Music still technically playing from hidden speakers. Servers frozen with trays at their waists. And in the center of all that polished money and floral perfection, the truth stood there uncovered at last. Not because I had screamed, not because I had begged, because someone important had recognized my face and asked the question nobody in my family ever wanted answered. For a second nobody moved. That was the strangest part. Not the accusation, not Vanessa's face, not even the fact that my father had gone, pale enough to make the flesh in his cheeks look painted on. It was the stillness. The entire room had the feeling of a theater after the wrong line has been spoken. When everyone knows the script is broken, but no one yet knows whether to pretend it isn't. Then Ethan spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You told my family she was unstable? He was looking at Vanessa, but the question landed on everyone. Vanessa let out a small breathy laugh, the kind she used when she wanted a hard thing to sound ridiculous before anyone inspected it. Ethan, no. That's not what I said. I watched his face. Something had changed there. Not fully. Not enough for conviction, but enough for distance. It was the first time all weekend he had looked at her, as someone who might be editing the truth instead of simply presenting it. Charles didn't let the moment slide. What exactly did you say? He asked. That was the question, wasn't it? Not what did you mean? Not are we all misunderstanding each other? What exactly did you say? It left no room to hide behind tone or intention or bridal stress. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Monica stepped in. Of course she did. She moved forward with both hands slightly raised, wearing that expression women like her perfect over decades. The one that says let's all calm down while quietly demanding everyone protect the person who caused the damage. This is becoming unnecessarily uncomfortable, she said, her voice soft and measured. Lauren is taking things personally. I turned to look at her. There it was again. The family language. Not cruel. Just tidy enough to erase the bruise. Charles shifted his attention to Monica. Personally. It was one word but it hit with weight. Monica's smile tightened. I only mean emotions are high. It's a wedding weekend. No, I said. It's a pattern. Nobody interrupted me this time. That part mattered. For once, the room did not automatically bend around Vanessa's need to keep control. I looked at Ethan first because he was the one person here who still seemed to believe there might be an explanation that preserved everyone's dignity. There were family photos I wasn't included in, I said. Events I was invited to just long enough to be counted, then placed at the edges. Stories told about me so people wouldn't ask why I never seemed to belong. I glanced at Vanessa. And when your family asked questions, she answered them by making me sound like the problem. Vanessa shook her head quickly. That is such an unfair version of what happened. Then give the fair version, Charles said. Again calm. Again devastating. Vanessa turned toward him, and I could see her thinking, sorting through possible answers, rejecting them one by one. Because she had spent years shaping narratives in rooms where no one challenged her framing. But this room had shifted. Now she was no longer speaking as the bride. She was speaking under witness. I said Lauren is private, she said finally. That she keeps to herself. That family dynamics can be complicated. That might have worked if she had stopped there. But people who are used to controlling rooms often over-explain when they start losing one. And yes, she added too quickly, I may have said she struggled emotionally at times. We all have. I was trying to protect her privacy. I felt something almost like relief. Not because it hurt less. Because she had finally said it out loud where other people could hear it. Ethan stared at her. You told them that? Vanessa turned to him. Not in a malicious way. Charles's voice cut in. Was it true? Vanessa hesitated. Monica answered before she could. Lauren has always been sensitive. I nearly laughed. Sensitive. The emergency nurse who could keep pressure on a wound, while explaining a prognosis to a crying spouse. The woman who worked overnight trauma shifts, and then drove home in morning fog with dried sanitizer on her hands. Sensitive was the word they always used when resilient women failed to make their lives more convenient. No, I said. I was grieving. Then ignored. Then useful only when silence made other people comfortable. My father winced. That was the first real reaction he'd had all night that wasn't defensive. It gave me no pleasure. Just confirmation. Charles stood with one hand resting on the back of the chair beside him, and his gaze moved from Monica to my father. "And you?" he asked. My father looked like a man who had spent 20 years surviving by never being the first person in the room forced to say the ugly part. "What about me?" he asked. His voice was thinner than usual. Charles didn't blink. "Did you know what was being said about your daughter?" There are moments when a person can still step toward the truth and lose less than they think. I saw that opening right in front of him. My father saw it too. And still, he reached for the same old cowardice. "I didn't know exactly how Vanessa phrased things," he said. "I just didn't think every family detail needed to become public discussion." There it was. Not denial. Not apology. Administrative betrayal. As if my humiliation had been a filing issue. Charles looked at him for a long moment. "That wasn't my question." My father said nothing. I answered for him. "He knew enough," I said. My voice was calm now. Almost tired. The adrenaline had burned off. What remained was accuracy. "He knew I was being left out. He knew she laughed at me tonight. He knew they had turned me into some kind of cautionary side note instead of telling the truth, which is that I was never the one being cruel." Vanessa's cheeks had gone bright pink now, not with shame but with exposure. "You are making this so dramatic," she said. "That word. Always that word." I looked at her, really looked, and suddenly I could see the whole machine of it. How many years she had depended on everyone around her treating her version as the polished one. How often she had mistaken being believed for being right. "You humiliated me in front of this room," I said. "You told your future in-laws I had emotional problems, so they wouldn't question why I wasn't in your version of the family. And then you introduced me as just a nurse. What exactly would make this dramatic enough for you? Tears? A scene? Me leaving so you could call me unstable afterward?" That one landed. Ethan looked at her sharply. Vanessa's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Because the truth about manipulative people is this. They are strongest when everyone else is still translating for them. Once the language gets plain, they weaken fast. Around us, the room stayed silent in that expensive, disciplined way wealthy people go silent when something messy has become too important to ignore. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to be seen choosing the wrong side too early. Then Elise Calloway, who had been quiet this whole time, finally stepped forward. She looked at me first. Not in pity. In recognition. Then she looked at Vanessa. "My husband kept a framed article in his study for 3 years, she said. He never forgot the woman who stayed with him on that highway." Her voice was steady, elegant, but there was steel under it. "And tonight," she added, "you called her just a nurse." Vanessa's face changed. Because that was the moment she understood this was no longer a clash with me. This was now a moral offense in front of the people she had spent years trying to impress. Monica tried one last time. "I think everyone is tired," she said. "Perhaps this conversation would be better tomorrow." "No," Charles said. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't say it angrily. But it stopped the room colder than shouting would have. "Tomorrow is the wedding," he said. "Tonight is when I found out the woman who kept me alive was treated like an embarrassment in this room." No one breathed for a second. Vanessa whispered, "Charles, please." He turned to her. And for the first time she looked small. Not because he was cruel. Because he was clear. "You don't get to please your way around this," he said. "Not after what I just heard." I stood there with my hands loose at my sides, my mother's pearl earrings cool against my skin, and I realized something I had never felt in my father's house. I no longer needed them to admit what they had done. The room had already seen enough. Charles's words settled over the room like a weight no one could politely lift. Nobody rushed to fix it this time. That was new. In my family, there had always been someone ready with a softer version. Monica with her careful smile. My father with his tired sighs. Vanessa with her polished laugh and one hand over her chest like the injured party in a scene she had written herself. But now the room belonged to someone else. And Charles Calloway was not interested in helping them tidy up what they had made ugly. Vanessa looked from him to Ethan, then to Elise, then finally to me. I knew that look. It wasn't remorse. It was calculation under pressure. She was trying to figure out which version of herself might still survive this. "Charles," she said again, quieter now, I think this is being misunderstood. Of course, when truth arrives in public, people like Vanessa don't deny it first. They call it confusion. Charles didn't move. Then explain it. The room held. Even the servers had stopped pretending not to notice. One man near the bar stood frozen with a tray of empty glasses balanced at his waist. Somewhere in the back, a hidden speaker was still feeding out low jazz, which only made the silence underneath it feel stranger. Vanessa turned toward Ethan. Not to me. Not to Charles. To Ethan. Because that was the center that mattered to her. I was trying to protect the family from unnecessary questions, she said. That's all. Lauren has always kept her distance. She's never wanted to be close. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was so familiar. Take the wound, reverse the angle, call the injured person distant for bleeding away from the blade. No, I said. I learned to stay away from places where I was tolerated only when I was quiet. Every face near us seemed to sharpen. Vanessa's smile flickered. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked. And I could see something difficult happening in his expression. Not just embarrassment. Recalculation. The slow collapse of an image he had been handed and never thought to test. Elaborate, he said. One word. Precise. Attorney voice. He wasn't defending me yet. He wasn't defending her either. He was examining evidence. Vanessa hated that kind of tone when it wasn't hers. This is not the place, Monica said quickly. Elise turned to her. It became the place when your daughter mocked her in front of a room full of people. Monica went very still. There are women who know how to dominate a room with warmth. Monica had done it for years. She had built an entire life out of low voices, tasteful dresses, and the ability to make cruelty sound like concern. But Elise was a different kind of woman. Same polish. Different spine. Vanessa tried again. I never mocked her. The lie was weaker now. Even she seemed to hear it. My father finally spoke. Vanessa, he said in a warning tone. Enough. I turned to him. That was almost the worst part. Enough now. Not when I was being sidelined all weekend. Not when I was introduced as just a nurse. Not when they had quietly turned me into an unstable footnote to keep their story neat. Only now, when the room no longer belonged to them. Charles looked at my father with open contempt for the first time all night. Enough, he said. That's what you have to offer your daughter? My father's face changed at the word daughter. Because Charles had meant me. Not Vanessa. And everyone heard it. For a second nobody spoke. Then Ethan asked the question that should have been asked years ago. Lauren, he said. What happened? The room shifted toward me. That old instinct rose immediately. The one trained into me by years of family dinners and holidays and careful exclusions. Don't take up too much space. Don't sound emotional. Don't say enough to make anyone uncomfortable. But I wasn't in my father's house anymore. And the worst had already happened. So I told the truth simply. My mother died when I was 7, I said. After that, it was just my father and me for a while. Then he married Monica. Vanessa already knew how to be the center of a room. And Monica liked rooms arranged around her. No one interrupted. I kept going. I became the extra piece. The daughter from before. The one whose name got misspelled. The one who appeared in family pictures only when it was useful and disappeared from them later. The one invited just enough not to create questions. I looked at Ethan. Your family asked why I wasn't around more. Why I wasn't in all the stories Vanessa told. So she gave them an explanation that made her look compassionate, and me look unstable. Vanessa's voice cut in thin and sharp now. That is such a cruel interpretation. I looked at her. No. Cruel was turning me into a problem to manage. That landed hard. I saw it in Ethan's face. In Elise's too. Charles didn't take his eyes off Vanessa. Did you tell us she had emotional problems? Vanessa's silence lasted just long enough to become an answer. Then she said, I said she struggled. Charles's expression changed from anger to something colder. Because her mother died? Because her father remarried? Because she was treated like an outsider in her own family? Vanessa's mouth parted slightly. She had no defense against a version of the facts spoken plainly by someone whose approval she needed. Monica stepped forward again. This is getting cruel. I almost laughed at the precision of that. Cruel was always what they called the truth once it stopped serving them. Elise, Monica said, turning to her with careful dignity, surely you can appreciate that family histories are nuanced. Elise held her gaze. Nuance is not what I heard tonight. Then she looked at me. And she said something no one in my family had ever once said in a room like this. I'm sorry. Just that. Clean. Adult. Real. I felt it more sharply than I expected. Not because it repaired anything. Because it named the wound without asking me to downplay it. My father looked increasingly lost, which would have drawn sympathy from other people if they hadn't already watched him stand beside every part of this. Lauren, he said, finally turning to me, you know none of this was meant to hurt you. There it was. The oldest lie of all. As if pain that repeats over decades is somehow accidental. As opposed to what? I asked. Being funny? His face flushed. Monica jumped in. Daniel loves you, said. I just couldn't place the face until tonight. I swallowed and looked away for a second. There is something disorienting about being recognized for the exact thing the people closest to you have spent years minimizing. I had saved lives before. That wasn't unusual in my work. What was unusual was someone treating that fact like it meant something about who I was. Charles nodded once, almost to himself. Then he said, clearly enough for the people nearest us to hear. You are not just anything. The room went silent again. Not because it was a big line. Because it was the first direct correction of Vanessa's cruelty, spoken by the one man in that ballroom whose moral authority now outweighed hers. I looked at Vanessa. The bride. The architect. The woman who had spent years deciding where I belonged. And for the first time in my life she looked like the person on the edge of the room. Not me. Her. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That was the first truly honest thing she had done all night. Because there was no graceful way to recover from what Charles had just said. Not with Ethan watching. Not with Elise standing there in perfect silence. Not with half the wedding room pretending not to stare and failing at it. You are not just anything. The line stayed in the air. Not because it was dramatic. Because it corrected the room. And once a room like that gets corrected by the right person, everyone starts revising their own behavior in real time. I saw it happen table by table. People who had laughed earlier now looked down into their glasses. People who had ignored me were suddenly looking at me too carefully. People who had accepted Vanessa's version without question were now doing the mental math of social survival. Who had been right? Who had backed the wrong story? Who had just watched the bride humiliate the woman who once kept her future father-in-law alive on a highway in the rain? Vanessa's face held for another second, then slipped. Not publicly. Not in some ugly, messy way. Just enough that I could see the strain under it. And because I had known her so long, I recognized exactly what it meant. She wasn't asking herself whether she had been cruel. She was asking herself how much damage had already spread. Ethan was the one who broke the silence. He turned to me first. Not to Vanessa. Not to Monica, because it was wrong in itself. Because he no longer had the standing to enforce it. Charles looked at him with something colder than anger now. Do you have any idea, he said, what it means to stand beside your child while other people diminish her? My father's face hardened slightly. The way people do when shame starts getting too close and they mistake defensiveness for dignity. That's not what happened. I looked at him. It still amazed me, even then, how committed he was to the lie that if he never named a harm, he had not participated in it. You laughed, I said. That was all. I didn't need more. He flinched again, smaller this time, but enough. Because the room had heard me say it before, and now it had the outline of proof in his face. Monica stepped closer to him, as if proximity could turn cowardice into partnership. Daniel loves Lauren, she said. No one answered that right away. Not even me. Because love was not the question anymore. Not the sentimental version of it. The real question was what shape love takes when it is tested by inconvenience. Does it speak? Does it interrupt? Does it risk tension to protect the person being cut down? Or does it sit at a head table, laugh on cue, and later claim no harm was intended? Charles saved me from answering. Love that requires silence from the person being hurt, he said, is not love I recognize. That one went through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet. Even the guests far enough away not to catch every word could feel the direction of the moral center now. It was no longer with Vanessa. Not with Monica. Certainly not with my father. The room had moved. And once that happens at an event like this, the event itself changes. The flowers are still there. The music is still playing. But now everyone is seeing the same people through different light. Ethan turned to Vanessa again. Did you really tell people she had emotional issues? Vanessa swallowed. It was slight but visible. I said family dynamics were complicated. That isn't what I asked. His tone had changed too. Less fiancé. More attorney. Less partner. More witness. Vanessa knew it. I saw her know it. She can be difficult, Monica said quickly. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was absurd. Because it was lazy. When the bigger lie starts collapsing, people reach for older, smaller ones and hope they still carry weight. Difficult. That word had followed me through half my life. Difficult to include. Difficult to understand. Difficult to explain. Funny how women become difficult the moment they stop cooperating with their own erasure. I became difficult, I said, when being invisible stopped feeling survivable. Nobody interrupted. At some point the hidden music had been lowered, or maybe someone had turned it off entirely. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that the ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. Sounded like a tension. Charles looked at me, then at Ethan. Your future sister-in-law held my head still with her bare hands while I was trapped in a crushed vehicle, he said. She kept me conscious until rescue arrived. He paused. And your bride introduced her as just a nurse. There was no recovering from that sentence. Not socially. Not morally. Not with the guest list Vanessa had spent 2 years imagining in her favor. Ethan's jaw tightened. For the first time he looked embarrassed in a way that belonged to him, not to the situation. I didn't know, he said. I believed him. That was the strange part. I believed he hadn't known. Believed he had been handed a softened, curated version of me and accepted it because doing so was easy, and because people raised around polished families often mistake omission for discretion. I nodded once. I know. Vanessa stared at me then, and beneath the panic, beneath the humiliation, beneath all the calculation, I caught a flash of something simpler. Resentment. Because even now, she seemed to feel I had done something to her by not staying small enough for the story to hold. Monica saw it too and stepped in front of her slightly, as if shielding a daughter from consequences she had earned were a form of motherhood. We should end the evening, she said. Everyone is tired. But Charles shook his head. No, he said. You want the evening ended before the truth settles. Silence again. Then Elise moved to my side. Not dramatically. Not for display. She just came and stood there. Close enough that I could feel the gesture for what it was. Alignment. And I realized with a kind of quiet shock that in 1 hour, this family had done something mine never had. They had seen what happened, and instead of asking me to carry it privately, they had let it become visible. Vanessa noticed Elise beside me. So did Monica. So did my father. That mattered too. Because power at weddings is not only money or hosting or who stands at the center of the dance floor. Sometimes power is simply this, who people stand next to when the truth comes out. And in that moment, no one of consequence was standing next to Vanessa anymore. For a long moment, nobody tried to move the night forward. No one called for music. No one suggested another toast. No one lifted a glass and pretended this was still just a rehearsal dinner with a temporary awkward moment that good manners could smooth over. The evening had split open, and everyone in that ballroom knew it. I stood there with Elise beside me, Charles a few feet away, Ethan facing Vanessa as if he no longer recognized the woman he was supposed to marry tomorrow, and my father standing near Monica looking older than he had an hour earlier. That was the thing about truth. It doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it just removes the insulation, and suddenly everyone feels the cold. Vanessa tried one last time. She looked at Ethan first because even now, he was the only audience that mattered most. You know me, she said, her voice thinner now, stripped of the polished confidence she had worn all night. You know I'm not cruel. Ethan didn't answer right away. That silence said more than any accusation could have. Then he looked at her and said very calmly, I know you humiliated her in front of this room. I know you told my family something untrue to make her easier to explain. And I know you called the woman who saved my father's life just a nurse." Vanessa's face changed. Not because the facts were new. Because she had finally heard them spoken back without her control shaping the tone. Monica stepped forward. "Ethan, sweetheart. This is not the moment to make decisions based on emotion." Charles turned to her. "No. This is exactly the moment people reveal what they are." That ended it. Not the wedding, not the family, not the legal future of whatever came next. But the performance. The old, shimmering, carefully managed performance was over. Ethan drew in a breath and looked around the room once, as if suddenly seeing the whole thing from the outside. The flowers. The candles. The guests pretending not to listen. The bride. The parents. Me. Then he said, "I need some air." Vanessa reached for his arm. "Ethan." He stepped back. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just clearly. That clarity was worse for her than anger would have been. He turned and walked toward the terrace doors and nobody stopped him. Nobody, not even Monica. Because when the center of a room shifts, the people who once controlled it can feel exactly how little their hands can hold. Vanessa looked like she might go after him, but Charles spoke before she could move. "Don't," he said. One word. Quiet. Final. She froze. And I realized then that the worst punishment for someone like Vanessa was not public yelling. It was public powerlessness. To stand in the room she had designed so carefully, and no longer be the person who decided what anything meant. My father finally stepped toward me. Slowly. As if approaching a daughter were some act, he had forgotten how to perform without rehearsal. "Lauren," he said. Just my name. Spelled right. Spoken carefully. Too late but right. I looked at him. For once, I did not rush to fill the silence for him. He swallowed. "I should have." He stopped, started again. "I should have said something." It wasn't enough to erase anything. It didn't return the lost years. It didn't make him brave in retrospect. But it was the first honest sentence he had offered me all night. "Yes," I said. He flinched more at that than he would have if I'd shouted. Because simple truth is harder to argue with than anger. Monica stepped in immediately, of course. "We can discuss this privately," she said, her voice low, urgent, still trying to pull the whole thing back behind a closed door where it could be resized into something survivable for them. I turned to her. "No," I said. "Private is how this family kept getting away with it." She went still. And maybe that was the final break. Not with Vanessa. Not even with my father. With the old rule. The one that said I had to absorb everything quietly so everyone else could remain comfortable. Charles looked at me then, and there was something almost protective in his expression but not patronizing. He did not try to take over my story. He did not speak for me. He simply asked, "Would you like to stay or would you like to leave?" No one had asked me a question that clean all evening. No one in my family ever had. I looked around the ballroom one more time. At the people. At the candles burning lower now. At the half-finished drinks. At Vanessa, standing in the middle of her own perfect night with nothing left to manage. At my father, who had spent 20 years letting me go in smaller ways and now looked like he finally understood that loss adds up. At Monica, whose silence no longer looked elegant. Just complicit. And then I touched my mother's pearl earring. Small. Cool. Steady. "I'd like to leave," I said. Charles nodded. "So would I," Elise said softly. That surprised me. Then Charles gave the faintest smile. "Then let us walk you out." Vanessa actually laughed once at that. A broken little sound with no charm left in it. "This is insane," she said. "You're leaving because of her?" Charles turned toward her, and when he answered, his voice was so calm it made every word land harder. "No," he said. "We are leaving with her because of you." No one in the room spoke after that. I picked up my purse from the chair at table 14. Avery looked up at me with wide eyes, then said very quietly, "You didn't deserve any of that." It was such a small sentence. But it mattered. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with grand apologies. Sometimes it begins when one witness refuses to pretend. "Thank you," I told her. Then I walked. Not rushed. Not trembling. Not looking back every 2 seconds to see who was watching. I walked through the ballroom that had swallowed me at the beginning of the night, And now every step felt different. I was still wearing the same navy dress. Still the same woman. Still a trauma nurse who had to be up early, and would probably have sore feet tomorrow. But I was no longer invisible in that room. The truth had seen to that. Outside, the night air hit my skin cool and clean. The country club grounds were quiet beyond the doors. Lanterns glowed along the walkway. Somewhere far off, traffic moved like a faint river beyond the trees. Charles stopped near the valet stand and turned to me fully. "I have wanted to thank you for 3 years," he said. "I'm sorry it happened like this. But I am grateful it happened at all." I didn't know what to say for a second. People thank me at work sometimes. Families, patients, colleagues. But gratitude in the hospital is different. It belongs to the moment and then everyone keeps moving. This felt older, heavier. So I told him the truth. "I didn't stay because of who you were," I said. "I stayed because you were there." Charles's eyes filled again. "I know," he said. "That's why it means even more." Elise touched my arm lightly. "You should never have been treated like a footnote." I nodded once because if I tried to answer too much I might cry, and I had gone all night without giving that room my tears. The valet brought my car around. Before I got in I looked back through the tall front windows of the club. Inside, the ballroom still glowed. People still moved. The wedding weekend had not vanished. The flowers were still expensive. The family still complicated. The damage still real. But the lie was broken. And sometimes that is the most complete ending you get. Not everyone transformed. Not every apology spoken. Not every wound repaired. Just the truth, finally too visible to bury again. I drove home with the windows cracked and the night air moving through the car. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the dark glass beside me. Same face. Same pearl earrings. But I looked different to myself. Lighter maybe. Or maybe just no longer carrying the responsibility of making their version of me livable. The next morning I went to work. Of course I did. That too felt right. Because the strangest part of being diminished by your family is how ordinary your real life remains. Patients still needed care. Monitors still beeped. Coffee still tasted burned in the break room. I still signed my name Lauren Hayes on every chart exactly the same way. Around noon the unit clerk came over holding a box. "Flowers for you," she said. Inside was a note on thick cream paper. No monogram this time. Just a sentence. "You were never just anything. Thank you for my life." Charles Calloway. I stood there in the nurse's station with the noise of the air moving all around me, and for the first time since that ballroom I let myself cry. Not because I needed Charles to tell me who I was. I already knew. I cried because someone had finally said it in words strong enough to survive the room that tried to erase me. And that is how my sister's cruelest moment became her greatest mistake. She thought calling me just a nurse would make me smaller. Instead, it revealed exactly who everyone was. Her. My father. Monica. Ethan. The Callaways. And me. The woman at the edge of the room. The daughter they kept misnaming. The girl they thought could be managed with silence. The nurse they laughed at. The one who stayed. The one who was finally seen.